So, French apple cake. Now, the French really have figured this apple cake out. They have a thick enough batter on the bottom that can support the layer of the apples, and it's creamy and custardy, but not too dense or heavy. And they have a nice layer of cake on top that's a little bit lighter and flakier. The other thing is the flavor of the apples and the texture of the apples. The apples aren't overcooked and mushy, but they're not underdone and tough and leathery. So we're going to use Granny Smith's because they hold their shape and they have a nice tart flavor. So this is 1.5 pounds of Granny Smith apples. So now we're going to cut them into smallish pieces, and you can use an apple core if you have one, but I prefer to use this trick where you just slice down around the core.
This is quite a lot of apple, too.
Yeah.
Because a lot of American recipes just sprinkle some apples in a batter.
Yeah, that's not quite apple cake. And you want to cut this now into eighths. And then we're going to cut it crosswise into very thin pieces that make it easy to incorporate into the cake batter and cook through evenly. And the other thing we found is you don't want to add the apples to the cake batter when they're raw because they never really cook through when they release a lot of moisture into the cake at the wrong time and make the cake kind of dense. So we're going to par cook them, and you don't want to cook them through completely. You just want them to be a little bit flexible and bendable. So we'll check them after about 3 minutes. And they seem just perfect. You can kind of bend them. They're flexible, but they have a little bit of snap left. So we're going to put these apples into a bowl. We're going to let them cool off for a little bit before we mix them into the cake batter. We're going to boost their flavor a little bit with a shot of Calvados. And this is a little bit of lemon juice. This is a teaspoon of lemon juice. And that's it. All right, so the apples have been cooling for about 15 minutes, and it's time to make our batter. And as you mentioned earlier, we're not going to use a mixer. This is the quick bread method where you have a bowl of dry ingredients, a bowl of wet, and you mix them together. We're going to start with the dry mixture, and this is a cup of all-purpose flour, to which we're going to add a cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and a little bit of salt. This is half a teaspoon of salt. We'll whisk this together. All right, so now time to work on the wet ingredients. And we're going to start with a cup of milk. And to this, we're going to add a cup of oil. And of course, we tried butter and other types of fats. And surprisingly, we liked the oil because the apple flavor is quite delicate, and the oil really allowed the apple flavor to shine through. And we're going to add 1 egg. And this is a little bit of vanilla. This is a teaspoon. And we're going to whisk this together. All right, now we're slowly going to add the dry ingredients to the bowl of wet ingredients. And we're just going to fold them together until the cake batter is mostly smooth. A few lumps are okay. This very basic cake can be divided and then altered separately to make both a custardy layer and the cake layer on top. So what we're going to do is measure out a cup of this batter into a separate bowl. And this will be for the top layer. And now to the base layer that we wanted it to be a bit more custardy, we're going to add some egg yolks. This is 2 large egg yolks.
You know, in defense of America, this feels like a very American mid-20th century recipe to me. I think they stole it from us.
Crafty. All right, and so into this custardy batter, we're going to add the cooled apples. So this is ready to be put into our cake pan. If you don't mind bringing that springform pan that's been greased and is on a rimmed baking sheet lined with foil, because sometimes springform pans leak a little bit, and a little leaking's okay, but the foil line makes it easy to clean up. Even out the apples and sort of press them down so that none are going to stick up out of the cake, because then they'll burn. That looks good. Now we'll set this aside while we make the top layer of batter. So into our little bowl, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of flour so that it makes that top layer a little bit cakier. And I'm going to drizzle this over the top, which makes it nice and easy to spread evenly. I'm just going to take a little offset spatula and just smooth it over to cover up any of that bottom layer I see shining through. Just a tablespoon more sugar. We're going to sprinkle over the top and we'll make a nice crust on the top. Now, the one thing we found about baking these cakes is that they take a long time to cook through and really dry out because the apples are so wet. So this is going to bake for 1 hour and 15 minutes in a 325-degree oven. All right, so it's been about 1 hour and 15 minutes, and it's time to test the doneness of our apple cake. And you do that by taking a bamboo or a wooden skewer, and you insert it gently into the center of the cake. You should see maybe a few moist crumbs, but no batter to the skewer. And you can tell this skewer came out nice and clean, so our cake's done. And so now we're gonna let the cake cool for 2 to 3 hours. But after about 5 minutes, I'm gonna run a paring knife around the edge so that as the cake cools, it doesn't crack in the middle and stick to the sides of the pan. So it's been a little over 2 hours, so it's good and cool. And the one thing we learned the hard way about this cake is that custardy layer on the bottom is hard to slide off the cake pan bottom, so we don't. Just take the whole cake pan and put it right on your cake pedestal.
My cake pedestal. I gotta find my cake pedestal. I don't know where'd it go.
And if you want to, you can always put a little powdered sugar over the top, which I think looks pretty. The key to making a nice pretty slice was cutting those apples pretty small and giving them a head start in the microwave. Oh, that looks good.
Oh. Boy.
And it really tastes like apples.
The trick about this cake is it's custardy, but it's light.
That's right.
I don't know how you do that.
And that nice layer of perfectly cooked apples in the middle that aren't mushy, but still have their texture.
So this all-new recipe for French apple cake started with pre-cooking the apples in the microwave to get some of the liquid out. And then we used two kinds of batters, one that had extra egg yolks, and on top, more of a cakey layer with some additional flour. Put that all into a very moderate oven for over an hour. Let it cool for quite a while, and then a little bit of powdered sugar on the top. So there you have it, from America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen, a French apple cake that really deserves its name. Both French and apple.